Okay, so I'm just going to do two very quick examples, one simple interest formula example and one compound interest formula. I know I said I wouldn't do many examples, but I just want to show you how I go about doing these calculations. Okay, so let's just add some text. So let's read so long. It says that 3,000 Rand is borrowed from your mom. You agree to pay her back at 5% per annum, simple interest. And you agree to pay it back over 2 years. So the first thing I always do is I actually identify what it is it simple or compound, okay? And I write that formula. So for simple, it's going to be P1 plus I times N, which means that from this information, I need to get either A, P, I, or N, and only one of them will be missing, okay? So this one, I'm going to start identifying what I do have, and the one that I don't have is the one that I need to calculate. So what I have is that I have got a P amount, which was 3,000 Rand that I borrowed. I have an interest rate, so my I is 5% per annum. I have the number of years that I want to take to pay it back, so it's going to be 2 years. And I also have to identify which is I don't have. I have P, I have I, I have N. So the only variable that I don't have is my A, my accumulated amount. So what I do now is I simply go and substitute in what I do have and leave what I don't have as the variable. So 3,000 Rand, 1 plus, what is I? Well, it's 5%, leaving it as a decimal, okay? And I need to times it by the number of years. And all I have to do is put that in my calculator and calculate. Okay, so I'll type that in exactly as it is on my calculator and I get 3,300 Rand. Then I can ask you questions on this. How much did we initially borrow from mom? 3,000 Rand. So what do we call the additional 300 Rand? That is my interest amount. So let's look at a compound interest example. So as you can see, very basic. I identified what I have, identified what I needed, I substituted into a simple interest formula, and I use it to calculate on the calculator. So now I'm looking at my next example. So it says I borrowed 25,000 Rand from a bank. They agreed to 7.5% interest per annum and they compound it annually, so they're only going to add it once a year over 5 years. So as I said before, identify what it is that we are dealing with. Well, we are dealing with compound interest. So use your compound interest formula. 1 plus I, and this little hat means that I am going to put that to the power of n. So I'm going to go through my information again and I'm going to identify what it is that I have. So I have a principal amount that I borrowed of 25,000 Rand. I have an interest rate that I agreed on of 7.5% per annum, compounded annually, okay, per annum annually. And for how long? Well, it was 5 years. So once again, the variable that's missing, the one that I don't have a value for, is my A amount. So I just have to go and substitute this in to what is here. So A I don't have, P I do have, so I substitute. 1 plus, remember interest rate must be as a decimal, so 0,075, and that would be to the power of 5. So in your calculator, you will actually use your 5 exponent. I just can't type it like that on this app. So putting it into my calculator, 25,000, 1 plus 0.075 to the power of 5. And I get the amount of 35,890,73 that I have to pay back to the bank. And once again, I had a 25,000 Rand initial loan. So how much was the interest in total? Well, it's going to be the amount at the end of the 5 years minus the 25,000 Rand that I went and borrowed in the first place to tell me how much additional interest I will be paying. And that would be 10,890 Rand and 73 cents. So those are the two most basic simple interest and compound interest examples. But of course, these are grade 9 questions. We are probably never going to ask something this simple. What we do like to do is we like to mismatch the information. So I will give you A, but maybe P is missing. So you have to change the subject of your formula. Or maybe I is missing, or maybe N is missing. And then you would have to change the subject of your formula. So I'm going to spend the next 5 minutes or so looking at changing the subject of the formula for each one of them. And I'm going to do it in a general sense. I'm not going to do it as an example because we've done this already. When we did literal equations, that was changing the subject of the formula. So I am going to do that in a generic way. So let's go back to my simple interest here. So I'm going to, put on a text again. So using simple interest, and you can go into the slideshow that I sent you to find actual examples of all of these, okay? But that's not what this video is for. This video is to do a recap and to generalize. So I want you to change the subject to P. Then we'll change the subject to I, and then we'll change the subject to N. So by changing the subjects, we land up finding things that we wouldn't have depending on my scenario. So in my first one here is if I change the subject to P, it means I have a value for A, I have a value for I, and I have a value for N. P is the one that I don't have. So let's start with what my formula is. That's my set formula. I want to get P by itself. So in order to get P by itself, I need to get rid of this bracket. Now if P is being multiplied with the bracket, to get rid of it, we would divide. And if we divide on the one side, we have to always do the same on the right. So we would land up with this. And then we would just have to substitute in the values that I have, because I would have A, I would have I, and I would have N. Simple, easy peasy. I haven't shown the in-between step here. You can find that on the slideshows. So now what happens if I want to change it to N? Well, let's start with my simple interest formula again. So now I'm going to first have to multiply out because I can't get that in on its own in any other form. So I'm going to land up with P times 1 is P, and then P times I times N. My first step is to get rid of what's loose. So if I have a plus P over here, if I take the P over, it's going to become minus P. And I'm still left with P times I times N. Then I want to get N by itself, N as my subject. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and get rid of the P times I. And if we are multiplying, how do we get rid of a multiplication? Well, we have to divide. And if I divide one side by P times I need to divide the other side by P times I as well. So I would have A minus P divided by P times I. And I've changed the subject of the formula, so I would just substitute in and get the answer that I need. Please look at the slideshow if you want to see an actual example of this. It is done there. looking at my last one that I could possibly do, I need to change the subject to I. I'm going to follow very simple steps, or similar steps rather, and multiply that p in. I want to get rid of the plus p, so I take it over, it becomes minus p. And now I want I by itself, so I need to divide both sides by what I don't want. I don't want p and I don't want n, so I'm going to divide both sides by I times, not I times n, p times n. And that will leave me with what I want. Let's put it on this side so it all looks the same. And there you have it in a generalized way, not generic, in a generalized way of how we would change the subject of the formula. So these subjects are the values that are missing, the ones that we are trying to calculate according to the scenario given to us. So let's see what it is we can do with the compound interest formula. Okay, let's start by copying the compound interest formula. Okay, so there's my compound interest formula, and I want you to change the subject of this formula to p. We're also going to look at changing the subject to I, and we do not do changing the subject to n because you need a special mathematical tool called logs, and we don't do that in grade 10. Okay, so let's just look at what we do, or we can do. And I'm probably going to show this a bit more in-depth steps so that we can see what it is we want. So in this case, I want p by itself. So p is currently attached to this bracket that's got the exponent. So if I divide both sides by that bracket that's got that exponent, it will cancel. So let's see what it looks like. No, okay, so I can't show the division, but I'll just write here, divide both sides by 1 plus I to the power of n. So on my left side, I will have the a divided by that bracket. And since we have a bracket divided by identical bracket, they just cancel. And there I've changed my subject. Very easy in this general way. Now, the one that learners struggle with the most is when it comes to compound interest and changing the subject to I. So in this case, the scenario would be that they give me how much I have to pay at the end, they give me how much I took out in the beginning, they told me the number of years that it was, but now they want me to know what the interest rate was per annum. So let's look at that by starting with our compound interest formula. So now I want I by itself. So my first step that I can do is get rid of that p. So if I divide both sides by p, p on the right-hand side will cancel, but I'll have a divided by p on the left. And I'm left with 1 plus I to the power of n. Now before we can go into this bracket and extract that I need to get rid of this power of n. And the only way I know how to get rid of a power of n is to square root both sides, not square root an nth root both sides. So whatever that power is the root that we take. So because I don't have the nice maths set that I can type everything, I hope you follow on what I'm doing. So it's the nth root of a divided by p. And now that I is isolated, last thing I have to do is just get that minus 1 over plus 1 becomes minus 1 when we do it on the other side.